Cyrus Vale was supposed to be dead. Elijah Knox ruled the Eastbridge streets with an iron fist, and Silas Vane dealt in shadows and fear. But none of them were ready for the storm that followed Cyrus's name back from the grave. When bodies began to fall, and a symbol of a black crow marked every crime scene, the gangs realized too late. The silence they once controlled had turned into a weapon. And Detective Alina Mercer? She was the only one who ever saw the truth hiding beneath the blood. This is the story of a city that spoke only in whispers, until vengeance made it scream. Eastbridge was a town built on rust and shadows. Once a booming center of industry, it had fallen into quiet decay. Abandoned factories lined the skyline, like broken teeth, and the streets echoed with the sounds of distant sirens and the hum of lives barely holding together. Beneath its worn-out surface, something much darker brewed. The people of Eastbridge didn't talk much about the gangs, not because they didn't know, but because silence had become the only safe language. Two names ruled the whispered conversations. In alleyways and behind locked doors, the Black Rain and the Hollow Crows. Everyone knew who controlled which part of the town. The north side was claimed by the Black Rain, a ruthless crew led by Elijah Knox. Cold and methodical, Knox ran his side like a business, sharp, structured, and unforgiving. South of the train tracks belonged to the Hollow Crows, a looser, more unpredictable group steered by the elusive Silas Vane. Where Knox ruled with strategy, Vane ruled with chaos. For years, an invisible line split Eastbridge down the middle. It wasn't a peace treaty, it was survival. Neither gang wanted an all-out war, and so they lived in a tense truce, broken only by occasional skirmishes that were quietly buried before they could make headlines. Most of the town pretended not to see what went on. Parents walked their children to school with their heads down. Shopkeepers closed early. Police patrols conveniently looked the other way. It was easier to ignore what hid in the corners than to confront it. But everything changed one cold November evening when the body of 17-year-old Mateo Rivers was discovered behind the old train depot. He had been missing for less than a day. His body was found curled against a graffiti-covered wall, his throat sliced cleanly, his backpack untouched. No signs of robbery, no drugs on him, no gang tattoos, just a regular kid walking home after school. The town recoiled. This wasn't some gang hit buried in shadows. This was a child, a student, a brother. And suddenly, the silence that once protected Eastbridge became unbearable. Detective Alina Mercer was assigned the case within hours. Known for her methodical mind and sharp instincts, Mercer had made her reputation cracking down on organized crime in neighboring cities. Eastbridge, with all its quiet decay, was supposed to be a quieter post. But as she stood over Mateo's lifeless body under the dim depot lights, she knew this was far from routine. The murder didn't fit any known pattern. The cut was too clean, the placement too public. But the real clue came from Mateo's last name. Jordan Rivers, Mateo's older brother, had a sealed juvenile record. Mercer's contacts whispered that he used to run errands for the Hollow Crows back in the day, carrying packages, delivering cryptic messages, nothing too serious. He had supposedly gone clean after Mateo started high school. But in towns like Eastbridge, past ties don't fade. They twist around you like vines, pulling you back in. Mercer began to pull threads, looking into the gang activity over the past few weeks. What she found was unsettling. There had been tension, a deal gone. Wrong. A minor drug shipment that disappeared. A string of threats traded in silence between the two gangs. Elijah Knox had increased his patrols on the north side. Silas Vane hadn't been seen in public for weeks. Something was brewing long before Mateo was killed. And Mercer had a gut, feeling that the boy's murder wasn't a mistake. It was a message. She tried speaking to the Rivers family, but the house was locked down. Jordan was missing. Neighbors claimed they hadn't seen him in days. Mateo's mother, Delia, wouldn't open the door. She sat inside in silence, curtains drawn, staring at the empty chair where her youngest once ate breakfast. Mercer left, her card on the porch, but she knew no one would call. The deeper she looked, the clearer it became that someone had shattered the delicate balance that had kept Eastbridge from burning. Knox denied involvement, so did Vane. Both men sent word through their usual channels, not ours, but Mercer knew better. One murder like this doesn't happen without permission. Matteo had become the spark that would set everything ablaze. The streets had been quiet for too long. But silence, Mercer realized, is not peace. It's only the breath before the scream. And now, Eastbridge was holding its breath. Detective Alina Mercer sat in her office, staring at the evidence board. Matteo's photo was pinned dead center, surrounded by fragments, maps, names, school schedules, phone records. The investigation had moved forward, but answers were scarce. What disturbed her most wasn't what she found. It was what she couldn't. No witnesses, no screams reported, no security footage showing the actual murder. It was as if Matteo had been swallowed by the city and quietly spit back out. But Mercer had been doing this too long to believe in ghosts. Someone had planned this. Someone wanted him dead. She focused on Jordan Rivers, the older brother who had gone off-grid. She tracked down his former probation officer, who confirmed Jordan had cut ties with the Hollow Crows years ago, but he also hinted that Jordan had been receiving threats recently, subtle but real, unmarked letters, missed calls at odd hours, someone watching from parked cars. The officer brushed it off until Matteo died. Now it looked like Jordan had been the real target all along, and his little brother paid the price. That theory gained strength when Mercer discovered a name that kept surfacing in confidential reports. Cyrus Vale, a ghost from the underworld of Eastbridge. Cyrus had been Elijah Knox's enforcer before vanishing 2 years ago. He was rumored to be brutal, efficient, and terrifyingly calm. His disappearance wasn't just a mystery, it was a relief for both sides. Some said Knox had him killed after a power struggle. Others believed Cyrus had faked his death after refusing to take part in a massacre that went too far, even by gang standards. Mercer never gave those rumors weight, until now. As she went deeper into sealed files and off-the-record interviews, one bizarre detail stood out. Several weeks before Matteo's murder, the local morgue processed a body too damaged to identify. Burned beyond recognition, no dental records, no fingerprints. Only one clue, a faded tattoo behind the left ear, resembling a broken crown, Cyrus Vale's mark. But something didn't fit. The body was too small, too light, and the estimated height didn't match Cyrus's profile. Mercer suspected what no one else dared to say: the body was a decoy. Cyrus had faked his death. If that was true, the implications were huge. It meant someone who knew both gangs inside and out had returned from the shadows. A man with a motive, with knowledge of the old codes and a personal score to settle. And then came the next murder. Tommy Slate, a key lieutenant under Silas Vane, went missing after a midnight meeting near the river docks. 3 days later, his bloated body surfaced in the Eastbridge Canal. His neck was snapped, hands tied with copper wire. The coroner found something strange. Stuffed in his jacket pocket was a torn piece of cloth marked with the symbol of the Black Rain. It looked staged. But why frame one gang when both were already at war? Mercer suspected a third player, one operating outside the rules. Someone who wanted to ignite conflict by erasing the fragile line between the gangs. She started looking into unsolved attacks from the past year and found a disturbing pattern. A string of low-profile killings, small-time runners, stash house, guards, people on the fringes. None of them significant enough to warrant retaliation, but all executed with precision. Some were chalked up to drug overdoses, others labeled accidents. But when lined up chronologically, they formed a chain, a silent war already in motion. The final piece came in the form of a burner phone recovered from a cracked sidewalk near where Tommy Slate was last seen. The device had only one number, saved, and no outgoing messages. but Mercer's tech team managed to recover deleted voicemails. One stood out. A low, distorted voice said, "Silence ends when the blood speaks. I remember them all." That was it. No name, no trace, just a promise. Fear rippled through both gangs. For the first time in years, Elijah Knox and Silas Vane both withdrew from the streets. Their foot soldiers became paranoid, watching each other more than the enemy. Street deals collapsed. Violence surged. It was no longer about profit or control. It was about survival. Mercer knew she was chasing something far more dangerous than a gang rivalry. This was personal. Someone with a vendetta had found a way to manipulate two criminal empires into devouring each other from the inside. And in the middle of it all, a teenage boy had died for a war he never joined. Mercer made a silent vow at her desk that night. She would find whoever lit the match. Because Eastbridge wasn't just on the verge of a gang war, it was about to burn completely, and Cyrus Vale might be holding the matchbook. The streets of Eastbridge grew colder as winter crept in, but the tension in the city was already freezing the air. Patrols doubled. Schools saw fewer students. Parents clutched their children tighter. The fragile routine of life in Eastbridge had cracked. Rumors moved faster than facts, and one name began surfacing in whispers from every corner of the city: Cyrus Vale. The man was supposed to be dead, but his name carried weight, even from the grave. Mercer followed the growing trail of fear. Victims were turning up with an eerie consistency. Former gang members from both the Black Rain and the Hollow Crows, all killed with disturbing precision. No messy shootouts, no random stabbings. Each body was discovered with a single, clean wound and a crow symbol carved into the neck. Deliberate, controlled, like someone sending a signature. The police had no leads. The gangs had no suspects. But the streets believed the same thing. Cyrus was back, and this time he wasn't loyal to anyone. Mercer took the rumors seriously. She started mapping the killings and realized something chilling. They weren't random. Each location, each victim, followed a pattern, a path, spiraling in toward the heart of the city. At its center was an abandoned textile mill on the outskirts, boarded up and left to rot since the late 1990s. The place had once been a drug packaging site used by the Black Rain until a fire drove them out. Mercer visited the mill in the dead of night, accompanied by only one patrol officer. What she found inside silenced even her seasoned instincts. A blood-stained mattress lay on the floor beneath a rusted skylight. Nearby, a rust-covered sink held empty pill bottles. Broken glass crunched under her feet as she walked toward the back wall, where dozens of photographs had been pinned with nails. Faces stared back at her. Gang members, past victims, people connected to the underworld. And then, at the bottom corner of the board, her own photo. Taken from a distance, a blurry image of her leaving police headquarters. Whoever was here had been watching her too. She ordered forensic teams to sweep the place, but she knew it was too late. The real message had already been delivered. The killings weren't about territory anymore. They were methodical removals, like clearing a chessboard. And Cyrus, or whoever was doing this, was working with a level of patience that suggested long-buried rage. Days later, the conflict between the gangs exploded. Elijah Knox's second-in-command, Marcus Flint, was found murdered inside his own SUV, engine running, parked outside a community basketball court. 3 bullets to the chest, no sign of struggle, and the same crow carving on his neck. The community had just started a youth outreach program there. Now it was a crime scene. Hours after that, a warehouse belonging to Silas Vane was firebombed. 3 of his men died in the blaze. No survivors. It was the most aggressive move in years. Silas vanished from public view entirely. The Hollow Crows scattered, turning their safe houses into bunkers. The Black Rain started patrolling in pairs, refusing to meet in their usual spots. Every alley in Eastbridge felt like a trap. Mercer had never seen anything like it. That same night, a plain envelope arrived at the Eastbridge precinct. No return address, no writing. Inside was an old audio cassette. The department didn't even have a tape player anymore, so Mercer dug one up from the evidence archive. She pressed play, and a distorted voice filled the room. It was deep, measured, almost emotionless. You took everything from me. You buried me before I was dead. You fed the city my name like a warning now. I give it back as a sentence. I will not stop. Every name will fall. I remember them all. The tape ended in static. Mercer sat there in silence, listening to the hum of the machine long after the voice was gone. The tape had no fingerprints, no traceable origin. But something about the voice, low, steady, devoid of fear, convinced her that this wasn't a bluff. It wasn't someone pretending to be Cyrus. It was him. She realized now that Cyrus wasn't fighting for power. He wasn't after leadership. He wanted erasure. He was cleansing the city, not for justice, but for vengeance. He was eliminating the people who had used him, betrayed him, and left him for dead. One by one, he was dismantling the very system that once praised his brutality, and the most terrifying part wasn't that he was succeeding, it was that he hadn't even started with the worst of them. Mercer knew this wasn't just a gang war anymore. This was personal, strategic revenge carried out by a man who had already died once. Cyrus had no fear, no allies, no limits. And Eastbridge was running out of time. Eastbridge was unraveling faster than anyone could control. Crime was no longer predictable. The gangs, once operating in brutal but structured silence, were collapsing into chaos. Long-standing alliances were being questioned. Foot soldiers refused orders, and power slipped through the fingers of men who once ruled with fear. Elijah Knox moved his entire network underground, avoiding any public appearances, communicating only through encrypted devices. Silas Vane was no longer seen at all. His last known message was a cryptic threat broadcast through street art, a mural of a black crow eating a crown. No words, just the symbol, a warning, or maybe a plea. Detective Alina Mercer knew Cyrus Vale was close. Every move he made left behind just enough to show he was always a step ahead. She reviewed the timeline, the sequence of deaths, the symbolism behind each act. This wasn't random violence. Each victim played a part in his disappearance. 2 years ago. Some had ordered the hit, some had stayed silent, some had simply looked the other way. They were all guilty in his mind, and now they were being judged in the only language Cyrus believed Eastbridge still understood: blood. The forensic team finally uncovered something useful. A fingerprint partial on one of the photographs pinned in the textile mill led to an identity: Victor Rios. A former informant, previously embedded with the Black Rain, presumed dead after a botched raid. Mercer tracked down his last known contact, a retired officer named Lennox Gray, who had vanished from the force under questionable circumstances. When she located Gray living under an alias in a quiet town just outside Eastbridge, he confessed to the connection. Victor hadn't died. He'd been recruited by Cyrus, who had saved him during that failed raid and faked his death to protect him. Cyrus had been building something in the dark. Not an army, but a purpose. He collected forgotten outcasts like Victor, men who had been silenced, discarded, or betrayed by the gangs and the police alike. They weren't soldiers. They were instruments in a plan that had been boiling for years. Mercer returned to Eastbridge with a sinking feeling. She now understood that this wasn't just revenge. It was transformation. Cyrus wasn't destroying the gangs to take over. He was dismantling the structure itself, ripping out its foundation so no one could rebuild it. It was his final message. The silence they all lived by had allowed corruption to thrive, had allowed a city to rot. Now that silence would be shattered forever. Then, the unexpected happened. A live stream appeared on the dark web, spreading rapidly through hidden forums. A camera pointed at a chair in a dimly lit basement. Sitting in the chair, bloodied and gagged, was Silas Vane. Behind him stood a hooded figure. No face, just the broken crown tattoo on his neck. The video lasted less than 60 seconds. The figure whispered into the mic, "Elijah, you're next." Then the screen went black. It was the moment everything broke. Elijah Knox disappeared. Within hours, his network fractured without his presence. Police scanners lit up with calls from desperate lieutenants trying to escape the city. Storefronts boarded up. Sirens howled across Eastbridge like war cries. The city had finally been brought to its knees by one man with a memory too sharp to forgive. The following night, Mercer received an unmarked envelope at her doorstep. Inside was a photograph of a young Cyrus, barely 15, bruised and expressionless, taken during a police raid years ago. On the back, a single sentence was written in red ink. "You were the only one who saw me." She stared at the photo for a long time, haunted by the idea that maybe she had crossed paths with him years earlier, never realizing the weight of what he'd become. When she visited the station the next morning, news broke that a body had been found in the alley behind the old courthouse. It was Elijah Knox, strangled. No blood, no fight. Just the crow symbol, carved into his palm this time. Different, final. A quiet end for a loud man. With both gang leaders dead and their networks in collapse, Eastbridge began to feel still, again. Not peaceful, just empty. The kind of silence that follows after something huge has ended. Mercer watched as officers swept old safe houses and found them deserted, guns buried, drugs burned, and in one of them a small notebook with a single line written over and over. "Blood remembers what silence hides." Cyrus Vale was never caught. His name slowly faded back into the shadows from which it rose. But his legacy remained carved into the bones of Eastbridge. He didn't rebuild the city. He didn't claim it. He simply reminded everyone that silence isn't safety. It's permission. And in Eastbridge, the streets finally stopped whispering, because the blood had already spoken.